Hello, Dr. Lee, and hello, class. Today we're going to be talking about the Gaultiers' French flute music, a topic that runs deep within my heart as we've talked about it several times so far this semester. What is the difference between a fish and a lute? You can't tune a fish, but in the 17th century, a lot of people did not know how to tune a lute, and there are much different strategies to tuning a lute, a lot of different tunings as well. We'll talk about that later. French lute music and the Gaultiers paved the way for modern music. Today we're going to be talking about lutes, the Gaultiers, and Tomba de Manuzier Gaultier. But first we're going to talk about lutes. A lute is a plucked chordophone. Made of wood, it's from Middle Eastern origin, and it flourished throughout Europe from the medieval times to the 18th century, according to Waxman et al. It is a very broad type of instrument. It's seen in the hornbossel sax, which is like the Dewey Decimal System combined with a periodic table, where it lists all types of instruments and categorizes them. It's number 321. And because of its very vague and very broad definition, it is grouped together with a violin and a guitar. They're all considered types of lutes. So a violin is a bowed lute. A lute player is a lutenist, while a lute maker is a luthier. A luthier is still a term used today, and it is used within the violin world. So people who work on violins and make violins are considered luthiers. And it is a very ambiguous instrument. So it's a lot of different types of instruments all combined into one, but we all have a very general idea of what the lute is, and that's shown here. We're going to listen to it real quick. That was lovely, wasn't it? That was a very nice lutenist playing right there. And it was a very nice example of the lute being, oh, that's not what I wanted. It is the lute being a solo or basso continuo instrument. It was mostly being used as a solo instrument there, but it was traditionally used as either a solo or basso continuo instrument. And because it was used for basso continuo, they added on more and more strings to give it a lower sound. So within that piece, you could see that the lutenist was essentially accompanying himself, and that was because he had lower strings to do so, which was very cool, something that you can't really do on many other instruments. It's popular throughout the Renaissance era and extended into the Baroque in France because they really liked the lute. However, that led to the guitar uprising as the lute became more and more complicated, while the guitar only has 6 strings and it is still being used today. However, the influence of the lute can still be felt in the guitar music that we see nowadays. Now that we talked about the lute, we can talk about the Gaultiers. The Gaultiers, specifically Denis and Ennemond, are lutenists in 17th century Paris. They are educators, composers, and performers, and they wrote a bunch of dance suites for lute. They wrote exclusively for lute as well. Additionally, they didn't necessarily invent, but they did popularize the tomba. They were so similar in the works that they did that historians typically just refer to them as Gaultier because they can't really differentiate between the two. However, we're going to try to get into that today. What's the difference between Denis and Ennemond? We got to compare and contrast. Ennemond was born in 1575, while Denis was born either in 1597 or 1603. And Denis was born in Paris, while Ennemond was born outside of Paris and died outside of Paris. So Denis is called the Gaultier of Paris, or the younger Gaultier, while Ennemond is called the older Gaultier, or the Gaultier outside of Paris, essentially. Ennemond died in 1651, and Denis died in 1672. Ennemond held court positions. He taught princes and aristocrats how to play the lute, while Denis never really had an official court appointment, but he was still very popular within the courts, which was seen in textbooks specifically our textbook. Ennemond was famous, but he was not really published, and so was Denis. They're shown in La Rhétorique des Deux, which was a compilation of their works compiled by fans, but they were never officially published, or not frequently published by, in their time. Denis is credited for writing Tomba de Manuzier Gaultier. Ennemond is not, but he wrote other tombas. Now that we've talked about the Gaultiers, we can talk about Denis's most popular work as shown in the textbook, Tomba de Manuzier Gaultier. It's from La Rhétorique des Deux, which is the fan compilation of their music, and it is a memorial, as tombas are memorial pieces. A tomba is a piece that memorializes someone who is dead or is going to die. And this was interesting because typically you write a tomba for someone who is not yourself, but this is essentially not a biography. Denis wrote it for himself. He comes down from the heaven and talks to Mademoiselle Gaultier. It is a great example and uses a ton of style brise, which is the broken style, and it works really well for lute because they have a lot of different strings, so they can arpeggiate. It breaks a chord across a measure, essentially. It's a very famous lute piece, and it's an F sharp minor. We're going to listen to the first half. It's broken up by the first half up to a repeat. We're going to listen up to the repeat. It's right here. So you just heard up to the repeat and a little bit after, because you can hear a little bit more ornamentation, a little bit more freestyle in the second time through the repeat. Very common in the Baroque era. So let's go talk about the opening piece, the opening part of this piece. We're going to talk about style brise here. You can see that throughout this entire measure, throughout these several measures, you rarely have more than one note playing at the same time on the same exact beat. You have a bunch of notes being played throughout a measure, but they all build into one big sound. So we're going to listen to it right here. Excellent. So you can see a bunch of different examples of style brise all throughout this, and it expands all throughout the entire piece. We've talked about the first half of the piece. Let's look at the second half, the closing half. Right here is the second half of the piece. We're going to look at it all together, and we're just going to see some of the unique elements of it. Listen for elision and evasion, specifically. Excellent. So throughout this entire excerpt here, you can see that it would resolve throughout any particular portion, But the style brise and the elision and evasion used throughout here that keeps moving the piece forward ultimately keeps building on to that F sharp minor chord right at the end of the piece, which is a very tragic chord. It's a very sad chord, which goes along with Denise's death in the future. Very dark, but very pretty at the same time. Very Baroque, if you will. So today we've talked about lutes, we've talked about the Gaultiers, and we've talked about Tomba de Manuzier Gaultier. And I hope that you can see that French lute music and the Gaultiers paved the way for modern music. We have a lot of different examples being used throughout the modern music genre today, especially with guitars. You can see a lot of guitar music using styles that are shown throughout French lute music and styles that are used by the Gaultiers. So picture this. You're in a field. It's a beautiful field. You can hear music playing on your iPod Nano. And it is guitar music. It is peaceful. It is tranquil. And you feel at peace. You can credit this piece to the Gaultiers and their French lute music. I hope that you learned a lot today. We got some references here. If you want to do some further reading, here it is. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great day.